which will, for each speaker, which we'll stick to. And if we can just be concise, respective, and also if you're asked any questions that you stay online and answer them, and listen to any other questions or comments made. So let's get on with it. We have the first item, which is DA 1442022, which is 39 Glenair Avenue, North Bondi, the demolition of existing building and construction. We have one objector, Aprila Quayle. Are you there?
Yes, yeah.
Thank you. We're ready to go when you are. Thank you.
Sorry, just put my video on. Hi, my name's Aprila. I'm talking on behalf of the residents at 41 Glen Avenue. Our property, our apartment, our unit block of 8 backs onto 39 Glen Avenue. We're just concerned, obviously, our residents, there's probably about 10 of us here, and there's another 10 probably in 43 Glenair Avenue, which is another apartment block which backs onto 39. Our main concerns are the impact it's going to have to the neighbourhood. We feel like the scale of the development isn't in keeping with the residents around. We also have concerns regarding the windows that will be along the back of the development, which will face directly onto our gardens, which obviously we all are using the gardens frequently every day, and to have people overlooking us might be a little bit concerning. Also, the lack of sunshine. All of us use the back. I'm ground floor at the back of the apartment blocks. We have our sunrooms and bathrooms that face the garden and face 39 Glenair, and we're just concerned with the overshadowing, the size of the building and the lack of sunshine that we will be getting. At the moment, it's quite, we don't have much sunshine as it is, so obviously the back garden gets all of that. So we're just worried about that overshadowing. Also, we're concerned with the loss of parking. At the best of times, it's hard to find street parking, and we don't feel the development has taken that into consideration. And then also the block wants to be built into 2, and we're just concerned about the overall square footage of how much they're trying to squeeze onto a very small block, and we feel like that will impact the neighbours and impact us as a whole, as the residents close by.
Thank you for coming today to lodge your submission. Does any panel member have any questions for for Aprila? No?
Only one. Was Ms. Quayle's concerns of overlooking from the first floor or the ground floor?
From both, essentially, because obviously, yeah, I know we have a fence, but we are very close as it is at the moment. So obviously, yeah, we're ground floor and there's above levels. So both ground floor and the above level at 39 will be able to look into our apartment blocks and next door's apartment blocks as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for coming, and we'll make our determination after the conclusion of the public meeting. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
The applicant is now speaking, Miss Levy. Anne Levy. Anne, are you there? Oh, I can see you, yes.
Hi. Sorry,
Hi.
my wife's lost her voice, so it's okay if I speak on her behalf?
Absolutely, that's fine.
Okay. Now, apologise for this. I'm going to be speaking very fast because...
Maybe you could give us your name.
Adam Levy, sorry.
Thank you.
I apologise that I'm going to be speaking very fast because obviously there are a lot of issues in Council's report that we wish to address. And unfortunately, our town planner was not available on only a week's notice to address the panel herself. So I might just get started. The locality directly to our east and north is low density, in which the majority of dwellings are already semi-detached dwellings on individual lots. To the south, southeast and southwest, including in the area zoned as low density, the lots contain residential flat buildings almost exclusively. It's substantially over-egging the situation on council's part to describe the area as having a predominance of single-storey pitched roof dwellings. Notwithstanding the multitude of residential flat buildings, there are a number of detached dwellings with a second story of equal footprint to the lower story, including directly to our southeast at number 48 Glenare Avenue, and as approved recently as recently as May 2021 at number 6 Glenare Avenue. In addition, the number of semi-detached dwellings without a second story is fast becoming the minority, with 3 completed within the last 5 years and 1 currently under construction directly to our northeast. It shall also be noted that due to the rising land, even those dwellings to the east that remain single story are raised materially above street level, giving them an apparent bulk and scale that is not appreciable from council's report. In contrast, the lot in question falls away from the street, and the proposal has constrained the height of the development to only 6.4 meters above street level at the building edge in an effort to minimize any claimed impact on the streetscape and the amenity of the neighbors to the south. We wish to highlight that although council's report repeatedly refers to the proposal as dual occupancy development that is non-compliant with the minimum lot size and FSR applicable thereunto, the proposal is in fact for subdivision into 2 separate lots, of which there will be only 1 dwelling each, well within the applicable FSR. Council claims that the proposal is subject to a maximum FSR development standard of 0.6278 to 1, calculated based on the current lot size, since the Torrens title subdivision has not yet occurred, and the development application is to be assessed in its entirety. However, the application in its entirety includes the proposed subdivision, and thus we believe the applicable FSR is that which will apply on subdivision. The proposal is consistent with the predominant development pattern to the north, as is clearly evident from the table of lot sizes provided in the SEE and clause 4.6 variation request, which would have been reinforced by council's site visit. A streetscape analysis in plan form would not elucidate the matter any further. We note that semi-detached dwellings are a permitted development in the R2 zoning applicable to the lot. Council alleges that the front and rear building lines are inconsistent with the predominant building lines. Even discounting the adjacent residential flat building at number 41, this is simply incorrect. As the architectural plans show clearly, the front building line is in line with, and the rear building line is in fact set further back from the boundary than all the semi-detached dwellings to the north.
Time.
Oh, did someone want to say something?
That's time, is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah,
Oh,
good
yeah.
time.
Didn't
Sorry.
even get halfway through.
I
And
know,
I thought I was talking
3
fast.
minutes is very quick.
I know.
There might be a couple of questions that might help us address. Panel members, do we have any questions for Mr. Levy?
I don't.
No.
Yes,
Jan, yeah,
thanks,
Jan,
Chair. No, just a question about, we heard from the adjoining owners of residential flat buildings that, and as my inspection verified today, parking can be difficult, and I guess the difficulty would be that you'd have 2 driveways as opposed to a shared driveway for the development.
Well, unfortunately, we're constrained by the electricity pole that's present on the footpath. In the absence of the rather large expense that would be entailed in moving that, it's not possible to navigate around the pole from a shared crossing and still enter both lots without having to drive across most of the front setback to realign the vehicle. I also believe that if we were to have a shared crossing in the center of the lot, then that would leave insufficient space between the new crossing and the crossing for number 37 for a vehicle to park there. And so you would still be losing 2 street parking spots. Whereas with our current proposal, we have angled the driveways in order to maximize the space between the 2 crossings and therefore leave room for another vehicle, which is consistent with a number of other properties on our block.
So there's an adequate distance, what, 5.76 metres between the 2 driveways, is there?
I will just double check the plan. It's 5.62 meters
Right.
according to the architectural plans. Of course, with a greater angle, that could be increased, but then the foot of the crossing would be in front of number 41 rather than purely in front of our lot. Which would have no impact on them since that's just a blank wall at present.
Right, thank you.
I do have a question for you.
Yes.
Just when you said it's prohibitive with the power pole, has someone investigated that? Because I've done it on numerous jobs where it's actually not as much as you think. You have to actually go through Ausgrid to find out to move the pole, because if there's no communication cables like Optus or NBN or Telstra on it, it's not as prohibitive as you think, and that might be something that council would ask you to look into.
Well, I can confirm that there are Nbn cables running along those same street poles. No, we have not approached Ausgrid because when we inquired, we were quoted, I think, as much as $15,000, and that was 5 years ago, just for them to even look at it.
Okay, you actually go through like power control engineers or someone like that who does this.
Yes, but it has to be from their preferred list, and they charge because of that they can charge through the nose.
However, if it is the
Okay. Is there any other questions from the panel to the Mr. Levy? No, that's it. Thank you very much. We'll make a decision after the public meeting concludes today.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is DA 1192022 at 3 Portland Street, Dover Heights. We don't have any objectors speaking today. The applicants and their architects are here, or the architects, applicant and architects are here. Alan or Patrick or Christina, would you like to say anything to the panel?
Yes, I would like to speak for us. That's okay.
Certainly.
So we have proposed a small attic addition to the home in Dover Heights. Conceptually, the design has sought to negate any impacts on neighbours, amenity, view loss, overshadowing, and privacy. In so doing, we have worked closely with council planners to alleviate any concerns and have amended the proposal as required where neighbours or public amenity were assessed to be impacted. The result is a design carefully crafted in 3D, sought to retain views from the park, to negate any overshadowing of neighbours' windows, balconies, and private open space. Just 62 square meters in additional FSR, the design through exploration of shape and volume achieves its objectives while providing a much needed amenity to the occupants of the home. Whilst there is an exceedance of FSR, the variance from existing to requested remains low at around 15%. Our proposal achieves a high level of compliance with the WLEP 2012 and the WDCP 2012 planning controls, including maximum 10 square meter balcony area, 7 meter wall height, front rear side setbacks. The proposal also only seeks to match the existing ridge height. Despite any non-compliance, the proposal has been skillfully designed and undergone many revisions to mitigate any potential impacts on surrounding properties while still capturing the desired residential amenity the site is entitled to. In conclusion to that, we ask that you approve the proposal. Are there any questions?
Thank you. Does any panel member have any questions? Alan, could you just say, can you just pronounce your surname for me?
It's Muskowitz.
Thank you. Alison, did you say you had a question?
No questions.
Great. Thank you very much for coming along, and we'll make a determination after the public hearing today.
Great. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Next item is item number 3, and it is a DA 3062021 at 35 to 37 Hall Street, Bondi Beach. Again, we have no objectors speaking, but we have the applicant, planner and architects here. Would either of you, Lee, Scott or Brian, like to address on this application?
Yes, Madam Chair. My name's Lee Cosnetta. I think my wife was using my computer last night at PNC, not Amber Cosnetta. And I'll speak today. The architect, Brian Welch, is available for any questions as well.
Okay, ready when you are.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to first say thanks to the council staff who've worked on this proposal and many iterations of it for over a year now. We've reviewed the recommended conditions of consent and accept them all without any exceptions. The application was deferred a number of times and amended. The report now confirms that these changes have made appropriate amendments and have responded to council's request each time. The amended proposal introduces a greater mix of apartments to better suit ADG requirements and provides greater setbacks at the rear, creating LEP height and DCP compliance. The report accepts there are sufficient environmental planning grounds to support a minor variation to the height standard in the middle of the site, which has no material impact on neighbours or the streetscape. We agree with the officer's report and encourage the panel to endorse the recommendation by the council's planners. I do want to bring one matter to the panel's attention from the report, just to reaffirm and qualify the technical proficiency of this application. Because the plans were changed a few times, there were different versions of the height plane diagram and the clause 4.6 request for a height variation. So on page 182 of your papers is the final version of the height plane. There is an accompanying clause 4.6 variation statement on file in reference to that height plane. On page 109 of your papers is a previous version of the height plane, and the discussion that follows on page 109 is based on variation figures from a previous version. So the justification is the same, but for completeness, I just want the panel to be aware the height variation being sought is in fact 745 millimetres, as shown on page 182, not 620 millimetres as shown on page 109. And just to reaffirm, there is a clause 4.6 request on file dated 7 August 2022 that deals with that revised height plane and variation. So with that exception, we're in full agreement with the report and welcome any questions that you might have.
I think Jan's going to jump in with a question. Do you want to jump in, Jan? Yep.
After you, Jacqueline. Mm-hmm.
Oh, I was just going to ask you about the remediation of land, the deferred commencement. Your understanding is that there's a report to be obtained prior to any consent or work to being done on that property, if that was to be the decision of the panel today?
Absolutely. And there has been a detailed environmental site investigation report done. My instructions are that it's in draft form and to be released on Monday once it's been reviewed. So that work is well underway and it's concluded that the site's suitable for remediation.
Right. So that addresses any contamination issue that's been raised in the report.
It does. It does. It was something that was brought to our attention late in the piece because of the adjoining development and the way that that was handled. And when it came to light on the adjoining development, we decided to do it for both. And so the timing is that it's ready for Monday.
Right. So you've started that work, right? Yeah,
it's essentially finished.
Great. Jan, did you have a question?
Yeah, just following on from that. Lee, could you just then, often deferred commencement consents are considered to be a consent under the Act, and therefore that SEP requires that the consent authority be satisfied prior to the granting of consent. And it's my understanding, I could be wrong, I have been before, but it's my understanding that you really need that prior to, and it may be that this panel needs to electronically determine the application following the submission to say the site is or is capable of being fit for purpose, so to speak, or fit for the intended use. Now, I just raise that because that's one way that's the way that I generally handle these matters. But as I said, I'm prepared to be persuaded otherwise. And if I can just ask you, I noticed that the site next door, and that's your client as well, is it, Lee?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Okay. So in the interim judgment, which is something I'm not aware of, I'm not familiar with, but in the interim judgment, I was just wondering whether there were any words behind the orders that were granted there to understand the thinking of the commissioner at the time in giving those orders that way as opposed to a deferred commencement.
Great double-barreled question. In terms of the orders of next door and the process that went through, the initial drafting of the conditions of consent by council were that the remediation was dealt with as a standard condition of consent. So there was no draft agreed upon conditions where deferred commencement consent was contemplated. Those conditions were agreed, and because that wasn't contemplated as deferred commencement, sorry.
Can I just stop you there? Why was not that then put to the commissioner to do it via a deferred commencement? Because it just seems to me that it's night follows day, if that's what your understanding was. And I'm just trying to understand why this should be different.
I think it was a matter of timing and process in that appeal. So the conditions were provided, as they often are, sort of on the day of the hearing. There were substantive planning matters to deal with, and it's a judgment, not an agreement. So the focus was on providing planning evidence to the court. The court then adjourned with those conditions. And I guess everyone thought it wasn't an issue, frankly. So those conditions went to the commissioner. The commissioner then, the first that we heard back was that that was an issue. So they wanted that dealt with before issuing a full consent. So they are of the mind that
exactly
it can't be a condition.
Exactly what I'm saying here, in fact. Yeah.
So the deferred commencement being a non-operational condition consent, it can operate in this circumstance with contamination because all that the consent authority needs to be satisfied is that the site can be made suitable. And the report that we have says that it can subject to this DESI. So it can be done that way, but there is, of course, that more conservative approach to just maybe hand the delegation back to the staff upon receipt of that report, subject to all other planning matters before the panel today, if you're happy with the application.
Well, you can't do that because once again, it's preempting the consent. It says quite clearly in that clause, prior to the granting of consent, the consent authority must be satisfied.
Yeah, so then perhaps the conservative approach is that if the panel today was mindful that the application is otherwise acceptable, rather than see this again at another panel meeting in a month's time, that the consent authority, being the council staff, need to be satisfied of the outcome of the DESI.
The panel's the consent authority. So can I just say it would have to be done electronically by this panel?
That's an approach as well. Yeah.
Anyway, as I said, it's a bit of a legal issue, but it's interesting if there were any words behind that interim judgment to enlighten us as to why it was done that way, which is quite unusual as opposed to the normal course of events.
Yeah, no, it was unusual and there's no words behind it.
Yes. Sorry, Janet, it's Bridget McNamara here. I've just forwarded it to you and there's no reasoning behind it.
Right. Okay. That's helpful.
Thanks, Bridget.
Okay.
It's unexplainable.
We can have that discussion in deliberation. Thanks, Jan. And Graham or Alison?
No questions, thank you.
No
I was
questions?
just going to quickly ask Lee, just the question with the floodplain and the stormwater, that the lowest level had to be 16.05 at ground. I presume the architects have looked at that.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, it's something that's come into light recently because the flood study was in draft form and it wasn't part of the LEP when we lodged the application and all these other things. But there are a number of developments now in Hall Street that have their lowest retail level about a metre, 1.1 metre under the flood line for where water will inundate some of those retail spaces at ground level. We're actually, as part of this application process, asked to lower the levels of the retail over time, which we've done. The most effective way to deal with it is through conditions of consent, we think, and we've got some emergency response plan conditions of consent. It requires all the electrical equipment and things to be safe above the floodplain level. But because it's not a habitable space, there's no sort of real risk or impending risk of human life loss because it's only temporarily occupied by people. And with a good plan in place, it'd just be a matter of evacuating people in the case of a flood from non-habitable areas. So that's been looked at. It's not one of those sites that can take floodgates, and Hall Street don't really do floodgates either because it redirects water inappropriately. So it's just important to get people out of the site, and we can do that.
Okay. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Lee. And we'll make a determination after the public hearing today.
Thank you very much. Thank you, panel.
Thanks very much. The next item on the agenda is number 4, which is DA 123 2022 2224 Burrell Street, Bondi Junction, alterations and additions to a semi-detached dwelling. We've got an objector, Lisa Poulos, who's here, I've seen on the screen. I'd just also like to make mention that there's also a written submission objecting to this DA, Miss Belinda Harvey. She was unable to attend because she's on a flight overseas, like all of us wish we were. So lucky Belinda, but I just want to make mention that the panel have all acknowledged that they've received that written submission, and it will be taken into consideration during our deliberation. Lisa, would you like to start when you're ready?
I'm overseas as well, and I'm in a very third world country that doesn't have great internet, so I'm hoping that you can all hear me well. So I suppose I'm the neighbour to the property that number 24, and the three issues that we have, as you probably know through all our submissions, is that there's three standards of breach of standards that have been applying to this application. One is the non-compliance to the minimum lot size and development standards, proposed setback from the rear boundary and proposed setback from the side boundary. The land size is disproportionate to the size of the land and the building that's being put on it. It really fails to consider the immense impact on my property. I've tried to get someone to come and have a look at how big. We've sent photos. I think Belinda and I put that submission in last week together, in that we put photos that clearly show the impact and how close our properties are together. It fails to consider natural light and the impact on my house. The shadow diagrams that have been submitted are incorrect. We've now taken photos at the same times, and later times, that show that they're showing that there's no sunlight in my garden. I have full daylight garden sunlight all day, every day. And this is really important, not only that I've moved my office to the house, I work from not only the downstairs level, but the upstairs level, and the shadow diagrams do not consider the second level effect from their building. We've submitted this from the beginning, that they haven't taken this into account. It's not their place to submit what I do with my house and where I work. I work a lot upstairs. All my staff come to the house. I've shown that to the council a number of times. We also use my second level as a photo area. I do content creation. And so it's very, very important, the natural light that I have in this area, and this property will completely remove that light. We also have to take into consideration that these properties are already very dark as it stands. So the natural light that I have at the moment is imperative to everything that I do. Not only that, the fact that I'll lose this sort of sunlight because of the huge outward layer from my back door. I mean, it's just going to be the biggest eyesore for me, that I'll end up having to increase my heating and all those sort of eggs. And we don't want to do that. We're all trying to, I know that Waverley Council sponsors many things to do with the environment, and this is not something that we should be encouraging. Sorry. I've got all these notes written all over the place. The impact will not only be just on the light in my area. My garden area is an extension of my kitchen. So the bulk and scale of this property will be like something huge looking over my garden, and therefore remove all the joy and pleasantness that I get from my garden currently, which is incredibly important to my everyday living.
That's the time, Lisa. That's your time. Do you just have one last thing to wrap up on?
Well, I think that they've made a slight adjustment to the upper level, which is 1.2 metres second story, but it really still doesn't take into account the big footprint that it's taking on their land and sort of overshadowing my property, which I've had a real estate agent devalue my property quite substantially. I've always said that he shouldn't go beyond the line that we all are at. And if you look at the photos that Belinda and I sent in on the 16th of September, it clearly shows how clear there's no one that goes beyond that line. And so I really need the council to either come out and have a look, or really not consider this as acceptable, because it really is breaking three of the most major rules that you guys have set.
Okay, Lisa, thank you very much, and really appreciate you dialing in from where you are. And I know that wouldn't be easy. So thanks. And we've definitely heard your submissions and Belinda's. We've got Chris here, the architect, who's going to speak. You might be able to address some of those issues. Chris, are you ready to go?
I'm here, yeah. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Lisa. I presume you're occupant of number 26 Birrell Street. I'm not sure if council's actually resubmitted the plans, but after we got notified of the concerns, we responded by reducing the volume at the back. We pulled the realignment in on the first floor, and set back the site to number 26 by 1.2 meters. The shadow diagrams, there were some mistakes in shadow diagrams. They've been corrected and resubmitted. So we sent through plans and 3D elevations of the shadows, which basically show that there's no solar impact to the neighbors number 26 from until 2 o'clock. And at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, there was a very minor overshadowing onto the elevation, but mostly it's overshadowed as an existing form. So we consider the impact very minimal, and agree with the planner's assessment as well that this is acceptable. In terms of bulk and scale, we did provide perspective views from the neighbors, showing that the visual impact is very, very minimal because we pulled it back and also because of the angle. Excuse me?
Oh, no, I think, can we just let, Lisa, can we just let Chris finish his time? Thank you.
Yeah. So we reduced the volume in the back in the first floor and pulled it back. So from our considerations, there's no solar impact. There's no privacy impact because no windows overlooking the side, and the visual impact is completely accessible. And in terms of the subdivision, the property is already subdivided. So the only proposed is actually a subdivision alignment, a boundary alignment, because the two attached dwellings actually are across each other. So we had to realign that actually where the existing walls are. It is an alteration addition. It's not a new build. And so in this regard, it's a clause 4.6 variation, but that's obviously naturally because the existing dwelling is an existing subdivision.
Thank you very much. So is anyone from your team, anyone else going to speak? Philip or Thomas or Philip, or just you, Chris?
Just myself.
Okay. Panel, do we have any questions of Lisa or Chris on this matter? Jan?
Yeah, sorry. Just in terms of, I heard what you said, that the building's been brought back. How far did you say it's been brought back, Chris?
The first floor has been brought back by, I think, what, 600 mil. So the rear ground floor is aligned with the neighbour, and the first floor has been brought back about 600 mil. So
it aligns with the neighbour at 26?
The first floor?
Yep.
No, the number 26 steps back further. But he referred to figure 6 in the report, actually shows the visual impact of how much of the volume is visible from the neighbour.
Okay, thank you. And you're saying that that's reduced overshadowing and privacy impacts?
Correct. There is no privacy impacts because there's no windows overlooking to the side.
And the overshadowing. I noticed the rear faces north.
So we realized that the shadow diagrams, the revised shadow diagrams, weren't initially included in the report. I think that's been rectified now. I don't know if you had a copy of that.
Yeah.
They were issued on the 1st of September.
Yep, we do.
Okay.
Okay.
So it's clearly shown that there's no impact until around 1 o'clock when there's a very minor overshadowing to the windows. And then 2, 3 o'clock, there's some other overshadowings, but it's largely existing. But in the morning, from 9 o'clock until 1 o'clock, there's basically no impact, no additional impact.
Thank you.
Panel, sorry, I'll just ask the panel if they anyone else has any questions. Graham or Alison?
No,
I don't.
Am I able just another couple of comments in terms of the conditions?
Chris, can I just interrupt for a minute? I just want to address with Lisa those new shadow diagrams. Have you seen them?
They're not correct. They're absolutely not. They're not correct. I can absolutely tell you. Belinda and I have gone and taken photos at the same times, and they are not correct. They are completely incorrect. And we've now supplied you a couple of the photos from 4 o'clock onwards, which actually are later than what they've supplied, that show there's complete sunlight in my garden. That's number one. Number two, it's not about privacy. I understand that there's no windows on that side. It's the bulk and scale. It's a huge piece of unattractive building that I'm going to have to look at from my dining area in my garden. So it is a huge impact on me. I question that, you wanting to live next to that.
Thank you, Lisa.
It's not fair to say that it's not going to have a massive impact on my living area.
So I think the planners.
Chris, can I just hold on? Okay, Lisa. Well, thank you very much. What we'll do now, we'll just get Chris to address a couple of the conditions, which he said he was going to do, and then we'll move on to the next item. So, Chris,
let me note this condition number 5, which requires a $23,000 security deposit being paid. considering there's no work proposed onto council lands, we think that's probably a bit unreasonable. In addition, condition 16 requires a section 73 to be done. So the subdivision is not actually a subdivision, it's a boundary alignment. And my understanding, if there's no new dwelling proposed, there shouldn't be a section 73 condition in there.
Okay, well, thank you both. Again, thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Chris. And
Thank you very
we'll
much.
make our decision today after the public meeting.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Item now 5 is the next one, DA 180-2022. That's Unit 4, 81 to 83 O'Brien Street, Sydney, Bondi Beach. There's no objectors on this one either. We've got James Nadell, the applicant. James, did you want to address?
Yes, thank you, panel, for allowing me to present. Given the time restrictions, I'll briefly address the principal issues that are raised, starting with the FSR exceedance. So the total FSR exceedance here will be 24%, but I want to note that only 14% of that pertains to the proposed addition. Compared to the surrounding approved DAs, FSR exceedances go far beyond that sought in this submission. As an example, immediately next door at 79 O'Brien Street in 2014 exceeded its permissible FSR by 48%, in addition to breaching its maximum height controls. That's double what we're seeking. Also, in 2013, a residential flat building directly across the road at 122 O'Brien Street added an entire additional floor, exceeding its FSR by over 33%. It also extended the rear envelope of the building and built balconies and terraces. Most recently, a large development only 20 metres away at the corner of Wellington and O'Brien Street demolished 8 single-storey bungalows and 2 interwar residential flat buildings to build 54 apartments to an FSR of 1.1 to 1 when it was only permitted at 0.9 to 1. This last DA received over 100 objections to council. By comparison, 2 iterations of our DA have gone on notification and not one single objection was received for either. Regarding bulk and scale, the addition will only be partially visible from street level along the eastern boundary line. It is designed to be almost entirely obscured by the existing parapet, the shape and slope of which is honoured in the new roofline. The development is contained well within the footprint of the building, and the addition, if built, would still make 81 O'Brien Street the lowest lying dwelling on either side of the road between Simpson and Wellington Streets. Though the proposed structure does sit 20 centimetres above the parapet line, sightline drawings in the submission and any review of the site in person will show that the structure will not be visible with the exception of this eastern boundary. Nevertheless, if the panel thought it necessary for the success of this application, we can also accommodate the proposed roofline to fit entirely below the line of the parapet and therefore within the envelope of the building. Regarding design excellence, this is largely owing to asymmetry in council's report, so I'll only address that given the time. No asymmetry will be visible from street level. As mentioned, in the new structure will only be visible from one boundary. From the opposing boundary, the current roof only will be seen. Front on from street level, none of the structure will be visible, and any asymmetry from this building is far less than that of any streetscape across Bondi, where there is widespread asymmetry of structures with partied walls. Lastly, regarding interwar buildings, roof additions in residential flat buildings in Bondi are not rare. I can provide a number of recent examples, including heritage-listed interwar buildings along Campbell Parade. As an additional reference, an interwar flat building 200 metres from our home was proposed and it was successful in building an additional floor and existing roof changes to its roof line. This is DA 52, 2018 on the corner of Wellington and Lewis Street. This building exceeded its permissible FSI by over 100%. In our DA, there will be no changes made to the facade of the building. In fact, we sympathetically honour some of the architectural features in the design. Lastly, given the recent demolition of 10 interwar buildings, 20 metres from our front door, I am left wondering whether there are 2 sets of rules in place here, one for developers and another for homeowners and occupiers. And on this note, I want to appeal to panel as a lifelong resident of Waverley Council, a father of young children who go to the local schools, and a local doctor who cares for people in this area daily. This DA is not a grab for land. We are priced out of a larger home, and it is a feasible option for a growing local family to continue to live and engage in this community. Thank you.
Thanks, James. Panel, do we have any questions for James?
No.
No,
I don't.
no. Thank you, and thanks for coming and making that submission. And it is difficult. We understand that, but we'll make our decision today, taking on board your submissions.
Thank you for your time.
That will be available shortly afterwards. Thank you. Now we move on to item number 6, which is DA 494-2021, 3 Ormond Street, Bondi Beach. That's alterations, additions to an existing 3-storey dwelling, including rear additions. Name of the objector, we've got one, David Burgess. David, are you here? Yep, I see you.
I am. Have you got me?
Yep, we're ready when you are.
Okay, look, well, thanks for the opportunity to address this planning meeting. I'm a resident and co-owner at 62 Sir Thomas Mitchell Road. My wife, Lynn Cosser, has already made a written submission regarding the DA, but she's unable to attend this meeting. We're about 3 doors down from the proposed development. Essentially, for planning purposes, Ormond Street and Sir Thomas Mitchell Road are the one street running down. 3 Ormond Street is actually a heritage building and overlooks our backyard, which, along with the rear gardens of residents in Francis Street, Ormond Street and Sir Thomas Mitchell Road, forms an area that's currently known as the Ravine. 3 Ormond Street is clearly visible from our home, and historically our backyard, along with those in 60 and 58 Sir Thomas Mitchell Road, were the terraced gardens for the building which is now being developed. So this is a significant development in every sense of the word, and well worthy of extensive interest and consultation over the way it's carried out. Not just, I think, for the local residents, but for everyone in the Bondi Basin. Now, we oppose the DA for 3 key reasons. The first is height. The proposed DA exceeds the Waverley height limits by 2.1 metres. Now, this is 25% above the rules that govern developments in this area, and I think 25% by any reckoning is a substantial exception. And once exceptions are made, then they are used to justify other developments, as we've just heard in that application previous to this. The justification for the height being allowed is that the current building on the site is already this height. Now, the flaw in this justification is that the current height is illegal. The current building is that height because of illegal building works that were carried out illegally and then not policed. Allowing this situation to continue sets a very poor precedent and goes against council's stated objectives for this area, which are laid out in the DCP. Acceptance of this illegal height limit in the DA essentially codifies the height for the area. It becomes a standard and is used as justification for future developments. Given the sought-after nature of this area, developers are constantly submitting DAs that exceed height limits, and indeed this has occurred already in the adjoining residence at 56 Sir Thomas Mitchell Road. I feel, and my neighbours feel, that it's the obligation of this planning panel to enforce the integrity of the planning codes to ensure the proper processes of planning in this area. The previous flouting of height limits should not be condoned and then legitimised, especially on a heritage building in a significant area. 3 Ormond Street stands on top of the hill, as I mentioned, and can be seen from Francis Street, Ormond Street, and all the way down Sir Thomas Mitchell Road. Legitimising illegal work and allowing building beyond the development codes has the potential to significantly affect the character of this area, as I said, is known as the Ravine, and is pretty critical to council's planning objectives in the area. Height limits are in the code for a reason, and I think they need to be enforced, not condoned. Second point is...
David, that's your time.
Is it? Okay, well, the FSR is essentially the same argument. There is nothing in the that allows it to justify it's going beyond that. And the third is the removal of the trees. The photos of the trees don't show the extensive canopy. There's no justification for the removal of the 3 significant trees except for cost. And I think that can be worked around given the importance of canopy for both the environment and for the residents, and especially given that the DCP was formulated in 2012. Things have changed since then, and council is currently reviewing its policies, as I understand, and is even looking at making it much more difficult to even prune branches off trees that size, let alone remove them. So those are the interests of the local residents, and I'm sort of representing them. So it's actually, even though council has sort of given the green light to most of it, I don't think that's the correct decision, and it can be worked around with conditions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David, for coming and making that submission on behalf of your wife and neighbours. I've got Kima Doyle and Yung Gao and Jane McNeil are all speaking, or are we just going to hear from one?
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. I'll address the panel. I can address those those points raised, and then obviously we're available to answer the questions if you have.
Thank you.
So first of all, we have read Council's report and recommendation, and we strongly support its findings and along with its conditions of consent. In respect to the 3 items that were just raised by the neighbour, I just want to highlight again, this is not an immediate neighbour to the development site. This property sits some 4 sites from the development site in question. Firstly, to the tree removal, the application proposes to remove 3 exempt species. In lieu of that, there is suitable replacement planting proposed. So on that basis, we think it is reasonable. Regards to the FSR, yes, there is a minor additional GFA proposed, but this is largely contained within the building's existing envelope and setbacks and addressed throughout the planner's assessment report. This additional GFA does not result in any adverse impacts by way of solar impact, privacy. They've all been addressed adequately within the planner's report. And then lastly, regarding height, look, I was not aware of any illegal works, and I questioned this statement and the validity of it. And in respect to the height non-compliance, all new works that are taking place are below the existing maximum building height on site. The existing building exceeds the height standard by 29%. We're taking that down to 25%. And I think if you look at drawing DA 1402, the building height non-compliance plane that was prepared by the architect, you can really see that the proposal reduces the bulk and scale at this upper level considerably by deleting large components of the widow's walk and replacing it with a really refined, simple widow's walk and simplified roof form. And a result of that, as a direct result of that, those changes, you actually result in an improved solar access outcome to 5 Ormond Street. So I think drawing DA 1402 really highlights what changes are taking place at the upper level and the reduced bulk and scale that's actually being proposed as a result of this, this application. So on that, myself and architects are here to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Panel members, do we have any questions?
I don't.
Just one question in terms of what are the trees to be removed and what is their replacement?
Off the top of my head, I don't know, but I will be able to look at the arborist report and tell you that very briefly. So unless Ewan or Janet, you can answer that question.
It's more the canopy question, isn't it, Jan?
Yep.
So I just bring up the arborist report.
So it's remove trees 1, 2, and 3, which are okay. I've only got the not the common name.
Yeah.
Relixium symposium. Does that ring a bell to anyone?
No, but anyway.
Sorry, Jan, it's Bridget McMurray here. The trees are actually listed in the report.
Thank you.
Right. Okay.
And they're commonly known as fiddlewood.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And what are the replacements? I'm just trying to understand the canopy, as Jacqueline said.
Yeah.
Right, that is fine.
I mean, that's a valid point about the loss of trees, like replacing with a suitable tree. Well, does it have the same canopy? That's the significant loss to the neighbours. Maybe what we could do is, if there was when we get our head around this in discussions, if there was a discussion around the type of tree, with a similar canopy size, and if it was suitable, would that be something your client would not be able to manage?
Of course, we can accommodate, an additional tree, to offset that. But looking at the landscape plans, it's 3 trees at the front of the property. 2 of them look small from their canopy cover. The third one,
the rear ones, I think it might be anyway.
There's no rear trees to be removed, or the tree along the rear setback to return.
The three existing trees at the front, at the very, very front setback, that are proposed to be removed. 2 are small. 1 looks like it has slightly larger canopy cover, which extends over the street. But if the panel is of a mind to, introduce an additional tree to offset that canopy cover, we're more than happy to support that.
Okay, thanks. The reason why I asked the question is because I didn't have the landscape plan in my bundle, but I know it would be there. Okay, thank you.
Is there any further questions, panel?
No. With that one.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you, David and Kima.
Thank you
for coming along today, and we'll make our decision after the public meeting today. Thank you. Now we go on to our last item, which is number 7, DA 1572022. It's the demolition of the existing building construction of a 14-storey shop-top housing at 362 to 384 Oxford Street, Bondi Junction. We have one objector, Peter Lynch, who's here to speak. I've seen Peter. And then we have a number of applicant speakers, and hopefully we'll just hear from 1 or 2 of them. But we'll hear from them later. So, Peter, would you like to commence when you're ready? Peter?
Peter, you're on mute, I think.
Oh, there you are. Yes, you're on mute. Down the bottom of your screen, you should see a little microphone, bottom left, maybe. If you could press that. Are we able to unmute Peter? We can't hear you, Peter. You're on mute. I don't have the ability as chair, but I would think that
I can unmute him, but I've sent a message asking him to unmute.
Oh, you don't have the power to unmute either, Rosalina. No.
No.
Peter, down the bottom left of your screen, I think if you move your cursor down there, you'll see a microphone. If you just press on that. Yep,
that's right now, but I'm sorry it wasn't working before.
That's fine.
Yes, I'm sorry about that.
When you're ready.
I'd like to address what hasn't been mentioned in the report, and that's the increase in traffic for this construction. The proposed building fronts Oxford Street, and that is a very busy bus stop because every bus coming into Bondi Junction stops there. The second frontage is Newland Street, and there's no parking. It's extremely busy. There's no stopping, no parking. The third entry point is Row Lane, and Row Lane is, well, it's a laneway. It's not particularly wide, but all access and exit into this building is going to be directed into Row Lane. There are plans in the building to have a preschool. residential and also serviced apartments. They're providing parking inside for 65 residents' cars, 17 visitors, 12 retail, 10 childcare, making a total of 104 spaces, and putting aside some area for 45 motorcycles and 132 bike spaces. But there's insufficient access driveway for the building. That's already been mentioned by council. This row lane, they won't be able to, well, for any commercial development on Oxford Street and planned for Newland Street. The only drop off for deliveries will be row lane. Garbage collection, preschool drop off. In the mornings and the afternoons, there will be the children dropped off the service apartments for drop off. And they also mentioned that there are active frontage sites in Newland Street and potential for row lane. Well, this row lane's going to be busy enough as it is. So it's not been mentioned, but that's, I think it should be taken into consideration.
Is that it, Peter?
It is, thank you.
Thank you. Very succinct and within time. Thank you. Do we have any questions for Peter, panel, from the panel? No, none?
I don't.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Peter. We'll now hear from Olivia. You're here, ready to go? Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm here. Thank you. Thanks, Madam Chair. I will just do a little spiel, a short and sweet one to begin with, and then I'll address Peter's comment. So I'm Olivia Page. I'm an associate at Guide Consulting, and we're the town planners on the development application. I'm joined as well by Nick Hatsey, who's the director at SJB, who's the project architect, and the applicant Stargate Property Group as well. So just for the panel's benefit, there's an existing approval on part of the site, which is known as 362 to 374 Oxford Street. The approval was granted back in 2017 for a 14-storey shop-top housing development with a planning agreement and variations to both the height and the FSR development standards. This DA seeks consent for alterations and addition, albeit minor amendments to that existing approval, and seeks consent for a new connected shop-top housing development, which directly adjoins that original approval on a couple of lots, which is known as 376 to 384 Oxford Street. The proposal also involves amalgamation of the basement, the podium, and amalgamation of the lots too. The proposal is an extension of that existing approval, and it's compatible with not only that approval, but the scale of development in the Bondi Junction Town Centre and recent approvals in the locality. We've reviewed Council's assessment report. In our opinion, the assessment report does not clearly describe the nature of the proposal as I just have, and as a result of that, doesn't distinguish between what the approved impacts have been and what the proposed new impacts are arising from the new shop-top housing development. For example, the view loss analysis doesn't make that distinction between what the already approved view loss is and what's proposed in this application. The proposal is well considered. It's been designed by reputable architects, being SJB. We just encourage the panel to consider the application on its merits, and we're really here to answer any questions. Before I do so, I just wanted to address Peter's comments. Thank you for those. As was described in the SEE, should the panel be of a mind to approve this application, there would obviously be a construction management plan that would be prepared. This is a consistent approach with what was done in the original approval, which is DA 89 of 2016, I think from recollection. There was a condition imposed, condition 37, which required the preparation of a construction vehicle and pedestrian management plan prior to commencing construction. From a traffic point of view, while our traffic engineer is not present with us today, the provision of parking, which is consistent with council's reduced rates because the site is captured within the town centre, is all compliant, and they worked through this from not only a waste management point of view, loading and unloading, but also the provision of parking. So it was well considered as we were preparing the DA, and it was something that was liaised quite closely between SJB and our traffic engineer as well. Thank you. Yeah, just here to answer any questions that the panel may have.
Thank you, Olivia, and thank you for addressing Peter's question about or concerns he had about the traffic. Does any panel member have any questions for Olivia regarding this DA, or Nick? Nick's online as well.
Not from me, thank you.
No, none from us.
Not
All right.
from me either.
Great, thanks, Alison. Well, that's the end of our items. Thank you very much, everyone, for your time and for attendance. And we'll now adjourn and close the public meeting, and the panel will now go into deliberations with the decisions being made available online later in the week, or as soon as council gets the opportunity to make those public.